JD Videography, JD here, back again for another episode. Today, I want to talk about all the relationships I've had through my years, and I use that term rather loosely. Indeed, it is about love interests of real people who are not celebrities. Keep in mind that at the time of recording, I am 42 years old and still have not had a girlfriend. Perhaps having to do with my social anxiety, I just haven't found anyone with whom I could share a modicum of my time. But it is not to say that I have not loved anyone, as there are several people through the years that I have wanted to share my life with. But I will go back to my earliest crushes. So the first girl I was interested in, as far back as I can remember, was a girl named Christine in first grade. Indeed, I found her quite attractive at that time, and my interest in girls was just beginning. Although, to be honest, I was more curious than sexually attracted to her, and would have liked to get to know her better. But after first grade, I never saw her again. In second and third grade, and perhaps continuing until I started middle school, there was a girl, Kelly, who I became interested in. But, of course, I was too shy to approach her, and at that time, boys and girls were more or less separated from one another. I didn't want any rumors or gossip about me or her, so I didn't pursue the matter much further, although I did give her a bouquet of roses in fourth grade. By fifth grade and beyond, I just hadn't seen her much anymore, so that was just kind of the end of that. In middle school, I hadn't really pursued any relationships with girls, although there was one girl, Christina, with a C, not to be confused with the Christine in first grade, that I found attractive. But of course, being the popular one, I never really interacted with her. In eighth grade, I met two more interesting girls, Joanna and Wendy, both extremely beautiful. Joanna was the captain of the cheerleading squad, so naturally well beyond my league, but smart enough to be in most of my classes. Wendy, on the other hand, was a quirky girl, and I found that to be particularly enticing. And perhaps it was her quirkiness that brought me to her in the first place, although I had seen her very rarely, as she was just a mediocre student. I had pursued both of them in high school. There was also another girl, Karen, I met in high school, but she was a transfer student, and I had only known her for 2 years. Again, very beautiful and popular. By my final year in high school, I gave up on Joanna and focused all of my attention on Wendy, much to her annoyance. I hadn't known at that time that she had already found a boyfriend, but I felt secure in showering my attention on her, to the point that I even hugged her on my high school graduation day. And that was the closest I had gotten to a girl up to that point. And I felt confident to pursue the relationship further, to the point that we even ended up going to the same university. Then the unthinkable happened. She told me she no longer wanted us to be friends, crushing my heart and beginning the darkest era of my existence. And from that point onward, I hadn't really seen her again. There was another girl in my university, Yulia from Belarus, who was in many of my classes in the first 2 years of university. After being crushed in my first year, I decided to pursue her in my second year and shared a meal with her. But by the third year, she transferred out of the university and I never saw her again. And I graduated my university without finding any suitable replacements. I had remained alone for many years thereafter. I had pursued some girls online, but they were really only flings and I had no romantic interests in any of them. And I had continued to be alone until about 2007. In early 2007, I met one of the greatest women in my life, Natasha. She was a very special girl, and I had already made a separate video about her. The same year, I became interested in the Philippines. While my relationship with Natasha was burgeoning online, I found two transsexuals, Santina and Akishi, who I had become smitten with. But they weren't so much interested in me as in my money. And while I held on to feelings for them for some time, my finances were in too much disarray to pursue them vehemently. So I continued to shower my attention onto Natasha. There was another Filipino transsexual, Maria, who I met and fell in love with in 2010, and even met in person several years thereafter. I lost my job in 2011, and due to my finances, my relationship with Natasha was starting to fall apart. That same year, I became involved with China and became smitten with a girl, Chang, in that country. In 2012, I basically ran out of money, and my relationship with Natasha completely collapsed, causing us to go our separate ways. My relationship with Maria also fell apart, though she was only interested in my money. So I pursued Chang more closely. In 2013, I applied to teach English in Korea, but that fell through, and at that point, I pursued a teaching position in China, hoping to get together with Chang. When I was accepted for the position, Chang told me that she had gotten married and moved to Guangdong. I tried to continue communication with her, but at that point, it was impossible. So in 2014, I moved to Chengdu and didn't have anyone, though it didn't take me long to find someone new. In April of that year, I met my angel Yui online, and I already made an entire video devoted to her. After all my previous failures, I was determined not to let this relationship go. Indeed, I was already 34 at that time, and she was only 22. But because of our mutual interest in Japan and Japanese language, we were able to become pretty close, and I spent some time with her. This, of course, was the closest I had ever had to a relationship, and a completely new experience for me at that time. But in late 2014, as I went to the Philippines, she kind of broke up with me. As I already mentioned, I met up with a lot of girls in the Philippines, but did not really pursue relationships with them, as I still held on to my feelings for Yui. While in the Philippines, I had my first kiss with Maria. Returning to China, I felt very distraught. There was one girl, Francesca, who was my coworker, and we became good friends. But she died 2 months after I met her. And there was another coworker, Pauline, that I tried to hook up with, but she ended up getting with my roommate. I met another girl, Linda, in Chongqing, who I met up with a few times, but I ended up upsetting her when I accidentally broke her taboo of not calling her ex boyfriend, and we parted ways. When I visited Osaka in April 2015, I met two girls, Yuka and Nagisa. But of course, they lived in Japan and were therefore inaccessible to me, though I had developed very deep feelings for Nagisa. So in the end, I got back together with Yui, and that went well for a while until I lost my job again and moved to Qingbaijiang and couldn't see her often. After my job in Qingbaijiang finished, I went once more to see her, but she was already pursuing schooling in Japan and would move there in the next few months, which left only one option left open to me to find work in Japan. I was unsuccessful at first, but finally I found a job near where she was living and moved to Japan to be with her. However, it was several months before we even saw each other again, and my feelings had only grown stronger over time. I hadn't developed strong feelings for anyone else in Japan, but I was fairly attracted to my coworker, Yuko. Of course, nothing would come of it. Just as our relationship was building, my company ended my contract and I was forced to leave Japan and Yui. I was completely crushed, but I hadn't given up on her. I was determined to return to Japan and be with her. Even after I returned to China, I tried to find employment in Japan. I had two short flings in Changzhou, Angela and Linda. Linda, not to be confused with the Linda from Chongqing, was one of my students, so that was completely out of the question. Angela was about half my age and a model, so I felt like that wouldn't be able to work out either. Not to mention, she couldn't speak any English. I wasn't able to find work in Japan, but ended up moving to Jinan. There wasn't anyone I was interested in that city, but I had short flings with a girl Anchi that I met in Qingdao, and a longer relationship with a girl Nadia in Shuzhou. And while I was continuing to pursue employment in Japan to be with Yui, I spent a little time with them. I finally got a chance to meet Yui again in Chengdu in 2019, one of the best days of my life. I promised her that I would return to Japan after my contract ended in 2020. But that was not to be. Because of coronavirus, Japan had closed its borders to travelers. I met her for a short time in January, but she was already preparing herself to move on without me. It had already been 2 years that we were separated by then, and it was starting to affect her. Moreover, her family was pressuring her to get married, and she did not want to disappoint them. But I refused to give up on these feelings that I felt were very strong and sincere. While I lived in Jinan, I met another love interest, Christina, with a K, from Changsha, but never got the chance to meet her in person. There was also another girl, Alice, who I had deep feelings for, but again, was never able to meet in person. I thought I might pursue a relationship with Nadia, but in the end, I moved to Chengdu and spent the entire year alone. And then I left China and have remained alone ever since. But I still haven't given up on Yui, my strongest feelings. And that is where I am to this day. There might have been others that I shared some feelings for, but no one who I felt as strongly for as those I already mentioned. And that is the history of my relationships. If you found this video interesting, feel free to leave a like, subscribe, and share it with others. And consider donating to my Patreon. Thank you again for listening to my story, and see you again next time.